Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim, Daf Yud Daled. Shavua Tov to everyone. I want to just mention, if you didn't get your bookmarks yet, they're on their way. They were mailed. The mail system's a little slow, so be patient. If you didn't order bookmarks at all, and you would like to order bookmarks, so we reopen the registration. It might take a while to get to you because we'll take about a week or so. We'll take more orders and then we'll send them. And if I can find someone going to the States, that will make it definitely quicker, even though still that's delayed. But anyway, we will try to get you bookmarks. We have a long time anyway to be studying Kodshim. So if you haven't ordered bookmarks, you can look at today's daf and you'll find a link to order it, and you can order your free bookmarks. So yeah, I recommend. They're helpful, they're useful, and they have a checklist. Now also, by the way, there's a checklist on the site, so you can mark off every daf you've completed, and with that, see what you've completed, what you haven't. So you should definitely use that feature if you haven't started. With that, we're going to get started. So we started yesterday with this Mishnah, with the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. So first it said that the Pesach Mechatat, Shelo Lishma, topic all being Lo Lishma, if you not only shochet, which we saw in the first Mishnah, but all the other actions, mainly the four actions that we talk about, shchita, kabbalah, accepting the blood, holacha, conveying the blood to the altar, and zrika, putting the blood on the altar. A machshava shelo lishma will disqualify, except for Rabbi Shimon, who said not if it's holacha. Holacha is not critical because you can theoretically, right, you can do it right up against the altar. You can do the sacrificing right there and not even have to carry it at all. Okay, that is the debate between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. Then we got to this whole question: is tefillat etzba pigul issue or not? Now, pigul is a different issue, right? We're going to have a lot of crossover. Pigul is a machshava. It's similar to lo lishma, but not all the same rules apply. The distinction between them is going to get a little blurred today. So then we move to this tefillat etzba mefagelet b'korban or not. Okay, when you put the coin in the chatana pnimit, the ones that go in the inner altar, the coin has to dip his finger in the blood. It says in the Torah. So is that a critical element? So we had this one said yes, this one said no. Okay, and then we ended with this lema ketanan. Why don't we say that it's machloket tanaim? Whether now the question really that we were talking about before that Rav Mary tried to prove in the previous section was that tefillat etzba is like holacha. It's basically how else you're going to get the blood to the altar, if not that Kohen puts his finger in the blood and then gets it to the altar. So if we view it as like holacha, then again, critical part if we're talking about the shita of chachamim, and it would be pigul. Now, the Gemara says maybe we're going to quote these two braitot. One said mifagelet, and one says lo mifagelet but lo mitpagelet. Okay, it doesn't. This action is not associated with pigul at all. And one says it is. So they suggest that doesn't that maybe the debate is it like holacha? Is it not like holacha? Is it like conveying it or is it not like it? And then that would say, it's a machloket tanaim, whether we view this as holacha or not, to which the Gemara said, no. You could say both agree it's holacha, it's just one is Rabbi Shimon Shita and one is the Rabbi Shita. And you say, well, even though it's holacha, Rabbi Shimon says holacha is not a critical element. Now here it's a little tricky because in this case, holacha is critical because, or the tefillat etzba, you have to dip your finger in. There's no other way to get the blood in. By doing that, but even though it's a critical element, still, if it's parallel to holacha, and holacha in general is not a critical element, then perhaps Rabbi Shimon would say in this case, there's no pigul because it's like holacha. That's what you'd have to say. So now they say, but wait, okay, very end of Yud Gimel Amud Bet, Rabbi Shimon might tefillat etzba. Now, I just want to remind you, we're talking about a chatat apnimit. What's the chatat apnimit? This is the chatat that the blood gets put in the inner altar. It's a different kind of chatat, right? It's the one we saw, like the Parlim Devishal Tzibor, the Parkoin Mashiach, and some others. Those go inside. So now they say, but according to Rabbi Shimon, there's some other sheet of Rabbi Shimon, which basically means this source is not going to be Rabbi Shimon. Why? Because if it's Rabbi Shimon, he wouldn't even say tefillat etzba is mifagelet. He would say none of the actions in this korban are mifagelet. Why? Meaning create a pigul situation if you have the wrong, the machshava, you're going to do it outside the time. Ha'amal, didn't Rabbi Shimon say somewhere else, and we're going to come back to this also later, kol she'eino hamizbeach hachitzon kishlamim ein bo mishum pigul. If any sacrifice that's done on the inner altar has no pigul associated with it. Why? Because the whole pigul pasuk, remember it? It's really talking about notar, leaving over the meat, and it's talking about a shlamim there. Shlamim is done on the outer altar. So basically, we're going to say anything that goes on the inner altar, there's no pigul at all, according to Rabbi Shimon. So now, okay, the inner altar, there's no pigul. The outer altar is like shlamim, right? A shlamim, anything that's brought on the outer altar is compared to shlamim because that's all done on the outer altar. Okay, let's just go through the way the temple looks, okay? Because it's going to be important also for later. You walk into the temple to the Azara, you walk in from the eastern gate. Okay, we're not talking about the part outside, which there's the Ezrat Nashim and the Lishkat Mitzrayim. There's a bunch of different things there, but I'm talking about you walk into the Azara. So the first part you get to is called Ezrat Yisrael, the first like strip from north to south, Ezrat Yisrael. Then there's Ezrat Kohanim, which only Kohanim can go in that area. Then you get to the altar. Okay, now the shechita, okay, is done for Kodesh Kodeshim in the Tzafon. Okay, that's going to be on the northern side, which is basically going to be the right of the altar. When you're coming in from the east, facing west, which is, if you go all the way to the end to the western side, that's where the Kodesh Kodeshim is. So the northern side to your right is going to be where the sacrifices are done. And there's a whole debate, right, to how much into the room can you do it? We'll relate back to that today. And then there's the altar. That's the big altar. It's a very large altar. That's where all the sacrifices were done, other than the ones that have to be brought on the Mizbeach HaPnimi and the Torah, the incense, which is burned on the inner altar. The inner, okay, so then you get past the Mizbeach. Okay, this is just all important. We're going to see this later. So I'm just already mentioning it now. Then there's this area called Bein Ulam LaMizbeach. Okay, that's between the Mizbeach and the Ulam, basically. The Ulam, what's the Ulam? So then this is all one big open courtyard. Then you get to this covered area where it starts off with a long, wide opening. Okay, it goes the long way, and then the room like narrows out, which is the Heichal, the sanctuary. The Ulam is this kind of chamber that leads to, it's like a hallway that leads to the Heichal, the sanctuary. In the sanctuary is the Shulchan, the menorah, and the inner altar. It's a very small altar, okay? And it's used, like I said, for the incense and for the blood of these particular korbanot that we're talking about. And then beyond that is the Kodesh Kodeshim. Okay, so that's your room. So basically what he says is, Rabbi Shimon, somewhere else said, any of the Mizbeach HaPnimi ones, anything done inside, no pigul. So he wouldn't say tefillah etzbein mefagelet bechatat HaPnimi. He would say nothing is mefagelet in the chatat HaPnimi. So you can't associate that braitot with Rabbi Shimon. It doesn't make any sense to say specifically the dipping of the finger in the blood is not going to be pigul when nothing about it, according to Rabbi Shimon, is pigul. Again, the rabbis disagree with this, but he thinks not. So it can't be Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so back to saying, well, if that's the case, maybe it really is this machloket. Is it holachazik? Not holachazik. Now they're still going to say, no. Ha v'ha both of them are the rabbi's approach, that this is holacha. This is parallel to holacha. And lo kashya. Okay, how do we explain that one says is pigul, one says is no pigul? By the dipping of the finger. Kam b'chata'ot chitzoniyot v'kam b'chata'ot pnimiyot. In the chata'ot pnimiyot, where you need to dip the finger, because it says in the Torah, v'tavala kohen et etzba'o, he dips his finger in the blood. So that it's this critical element, and there's pigul. In the chatat chitzoni, where you don't need to do it, it's not a critical element, and there's no pigul. Okay, to which the Gemara says, okay, wait a minute. If you don't have to dip your finger in for the chatat pnimi, the chatat chitzoni, for the outer one, you don't even have to dip your finger, then chatat chitzoni pshita. Obviously, there's no pigul when you dip your finger if you don't even... It doesn't even say in the Torah you have to dip your finger. Of course, there's no, you don't need to tell me, there's no pigul when you're dipping your finger. I mean, you don't even dip your finger. No, so they say, right, pshita, why? Because lo ktivu v'taval, because it doesn't even say v'taval. Right? Our whole question was, it says v'taval kohenet etzba'o, so that means, maybe this is a critical action. But the chatat chitzoni, it doesn't say. Now, you assume right now, you don't really know the halachot, right? Usually, how do you do sprinkling of the blood? And sprinkling is always a difficult term to explain zrikat hadam. Zrikat hadam is to pour the blood on the altar. It's done in different ways, and sometimes it's placed with the finger of the kohen. Sometimes it's poured from the kli sharet. Sometimes, right, there's different ways of doing it. Okay, there's mitzui. There's all different kinds. We're going to see them as we go on. But the chatat hachitzoni, okay, which is the regular sin offering that we learned about in Horayot. If an individual sins, eats chaylev by accident, brings a korban chatat, what does it say there? Actually, it's not poured either. Okay, the pasuk says, "V'lakach hakohen midam hachatat be'etzba'o." He takes the blood with his finger. Now it doesn't say v'taval, but it does say he takes the blood with his finger. And then it says, "V'natan akarnot mizbach ha'olah." And then with his finger, he puts the blood on the corner, right on the corners of the altar. Which altar? The outer one. Okay, so now we're going to say the following. Why did they need to tell you that there's no pigul when the Kohen takes the blood onto his finger? Well, it was necessary to say because sal kadat hachamina oil v'katuv v'lakach. Okay, now we're going to have a monkey enter into the picture. The Gemara loves to use this as an example of what if a monkey does it and the person doesn't do it himself. Okay, so here we're going to have a funny situation. Try to imagine a monkey in the temple hanging out with the blood of the sacrifices. So you might have thought, since the pasuk says v'lakach, it sounds like the Kohen has to take the blood himself onto his finger. V'atekof rami l'huayade, and if a kof came, a monkey came, and put, right, they always like to use a monkey because a monkey can do things that humans can do, took the blood and put the blood from the vessel onto the Kohen's finger, okay, and then the Kohen goes from there to the altar. By lemishkal zimna achrite. Right, now if the kof does that, if the monkey comes and puts the blood, because it says v'lakach, the Kohen didn't take it himself, the Kohen would have to do it again. So therefore, you might have thought, now you can see the logic. Kiman dichtiv v'taval dami. It's like it says v'taval, and therefore the dipping of the finger is a critical element. And if you would have the wrong machshava, like I'm going to sprinkle the blood outside the right time, right tomorrow, it would make it pigul. Kamash malan. That braitot is telling you no. In a chatat achitzona, the chatot, the regular ones that are done on the outer altar, where all the other sacrifices are done, right? No, it's not going to be pigul. Lahachi lokti vitaval. How do we know? Because it doesn't say and he dips his finger. Taking the blood is not as strong a word as saying dip your finger into the blood. Dipping your finger into the blood means it's very critical. And that's why it's pigul. And right, demash mahachi, umash mahachi. In other words, the lakach could be understood like that and like that. Meaning it could be said it's critical or it's not critical. In the end, that braitot is coming to teach you. Even though you might have thought it was this way, it's not. It's not critical. And in a chatat pnimit, vitaval is critical because it says vitaval. In the chatat chitzona, it says v'lakach. Yes, it's true. If a kof put in your finger, you'd have to put your finger in and do it. But if you had a pigul machshava, then we're not going to consider the korban pigul. Okay? And that's, in the end, how we explain these two braitot, which means the two braitot aren't coming to talk about both the chatat pnimit, and one opinion is we view this like holacha, the other is we don't view it like holacha. No, that's not the way we explain it. Okay. So this is a rejection of the lema ketanai, the suggestion that this was a tannaitic debate. Okay, now we get back to the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon machshir behiluch. And now we're going to get into Rabbi Shimon and his approach. Now, we're leaving pigul right now, although we're going to come right back to it and confuse things a little. But we're talking now about lishma, which was the topic of our Mishnah. Remember, already yesterday we started intertwining the two, right? As we thought this contradicted that, and they said, oh, no, that's pigul, that's lo lishma. We were distinguishing. So also today we're going to a little bit have some blurring of distinctions here. But Rabbi Shimon now says when you're doing holacha of the blood, if you have a machshava that you're doing this for the wrong korban, right? Let's say you're doing a chatat, and then you have a thought that you're doing it for a shlamit, disqualified. Again, if it's pesach chatat, it's disqualified. But he says, not in hiluch, when you're walking the blood, conveying it to the altar, that's not a critical element because you could have just slaughtered the animal right next to the altar. And you wouldn't have had to move it anywhere. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish comes, okay, an Emora, talking about this tannaitic opinion. Rabbi Shimon, I'm Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Modeh Rabbi Shimon b'holachat chataot pnimiyot shemachshava poselet behu. Okay, back to the chatat pnimit. A wrong thought, shelo lishma, okay, while you're bringing the chatat pnimit, you're walking the blood into the inner sanctuary. Okay, now remember, where do you do the slaughtering? On the northern side of the Azara, not inside the Heichal. You're certainly not in the sanctuary there, in the inner sanctuary, and slaughtering the animal. So if that holacha comes from Shimon ben Lakish and says, obviously machshaval shelo lishma will be poselet. Why? It's a critical element. You can't get the blood to the inner altar unless you, right, walk. You have to leave the area where you slaughtered it, which again, there's different opinions, whether it's opposite the altar and only there, or maybe also bein ulam lemizbeach. We'll come back to that later. which means it could be up until the ulam, but from the entrance to the ulam, that antechamber before you get into the heichal, that hallway, from the entrance to there through the ulam until you get into the heichal. Okay, now theoretically, now the mizbeach is got a particular place in the heichal, but theoretically you could say anywhere in the heichal it could be, right? So you'd have to, that area, if you're walking it from there to there, you could have a machshava shelo lishma, it will disqualify it. Okay, so that's for the chatara pnimit again. Now, they say, wait a minute. Here you're going to get a blurring of boundaries, of concepts. Rabbi Shimon, pigul. But didn't we just say that Rabbi Shimon holds that the chatara pnimit, there's no machshava of pigul. It doesn't make a pigul if you have a machshava chutz lizmano. Okay, what does that have to do with lishma? So Rashi says, okay, I'm going to read Rashi, kol she'eno, the third line in Rashi, they're not the beginning. Kasal kadata huadin lipsul shelo lishmo. Okay? When the Gemara asks this question, the Gemara assumes that if there's no pigul in the chatara pnimit, the inner, right, the one brought on in the inside sanctuary, there's no psul of machshava of pigul, there must be no psul for a machshava of lo lishma. Now that's a weird assumption because, okay, we're going to see in a second that it's a little tricky because the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi is going to answer in a particular way, and Rashi is going to say he should have answered like this, and he just answered in the way he answered because some other reason. But I'll already tell you what his answer is going to be, okay, even though he doesn't say this explicitly, and that's why I'm going to start with the way Rashi understands it. He could have answered very simply and said, you're comparing apples and oranges, okay? Lo lishma is a psul by what? By Pesach and Chatat. And the assumption is that when we say it's going to disqualify your korban chatat, we mean all chataot. Nobody distinguished between chatat pnimi, chatat chitzoni. So obviously lishma is a psul also for chatat pnimi. And the question you asked had to do with pigul. That's something different, okay? But he doesn't actually answer that way, even though Rashi says explicitly in the next Rashi, okay, I'm going to read the fourth line of that Rashi before we get here, because otherwise it's very confusing. He could have answered, we're talking about machshava shelo lishma. What are you bringing me pigul for? Okay? Two totally different things. If you don't understand it that way, then the sugya makes no sense after, because it's clear he's on a working assumption that lishma is definitely a disqualification, irregardless of pigul. Okay? So that's how you have to really understand Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Hanina. But instead, he offers something else, kind of in addition. And that's what Rashi says. Why didn't he answer that and he answered this? Because he wanted to teach you something else. So what you really have to assume, even though it doesn't say so, is that Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Hanina is saying, I'm talking about lo lishma, and you're talking about pigul, two different things. Lo lishma is for sure disqualified in chatat pnimi. The fact that Rabbi Shimon said there's no psul of pigul, that's a different, right? There's no pigul in a chatat pnimi. That's pigul. We're talking about lo lishma. And even pigul, okay, now here's where Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Hanina comes in, what he actually says, and not what he didn't say, what's implied in what he said. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Hanina, modeh haya lifsol mikav hachomer. He says, while he says that there's no pigul in a chatara pnimit, Rabbi Shimon said, but he agrees that it's disqualified, okay? There's two levels of pigul, remember. There's number one, is the korban accepted or not accepted? Is it disqualified? Number two, if you eat the meat, if it was sacrificed and you eat the meat, are you going to get karet? So if you say it's not pigul, it could still mean it's disqualified. It's just not going to be pigul that if you eat the meat, you won't get karet. Okay? That's what he's going to say. Now, where does he get it from? And this is why what I said has to be taken as a given. A kal v'chomer from shelo lishma. Okay? The working assumption of what he says is that lo lishma for sure is disqualified. Okay? And that there's no debate about that. Okay? And that's not what Rabbi Shimon was talking about. But even Rabbi Shimon, who said the chatat pnimit, there's no pigul, but it's disqualified. Okay? How does he know this? Because he's going to say the following. Okay? It's very simple. Kal v'chomer. Masha lo lishman shuchshalu b'shlamim. Now, lo lishma is actually not disqualified when it comes to a shlamim offering, right? If you offer a shlamim shelo lishma, we said it's not disqualified. Lo alu labalim l'shem chovah, right? The owner didn't fulfill their obligation, but it's not a disqualified korban. And yet, it's pasul b'chatat, but it's disqualified. Here goes in all chatat offerings, pnimi and chitzoni, right? Chutz lizmano sheposel b'shlamim. So then a chutz lizmano, which is disqualified by a shlamim, right? Pigul, regular pigul. You have a thought you're going to do it outside the time frame. Einu din shifso b'chataot. So all the more so, it should be disqualified in a chatat offering, even in the pnimi. So we're now going to say it's disqualified, even though it's not pigul that you'll get karet for it. So that's basically, so again, even though he doesn't say that's his answer really, according to Rashi, and I think Rashi is the only way to really understand the sugya, otherwise it doesn't make any sense, is that what he's saying is, don't question me from pigul. I'm talking about lo lishma, and lo lishma is for sure disqualification. No chatat, also the pnimi ones. So that's not a question according to Rabbi Shimon. So again, let's just say where we started. Rabbi Shimon Lakish said, the Rabbi Shimon agrees that in holacha of the pnimi, machshava disqualifies, a machshava shelo lishma. To which they said, but what do you mean? But it doesn't disqualify in pigul at all in any chatat pnimi. How can you be saying Rabbi Shimon says, right, remember, why does he say holacha? Because in the pnimi, you need to get the blood to there. There's no other way to do it without carrying it there and walking it over there. So you would have to, that would be, your machshava would disqualify, right? If you have a wrong machshava there, hiluch is essential. So hiluch is something where you can mess up shelo lishma. Question, but he doesn't say there's pigul at all in all these korbanot. I mean, if there's no pigul, we assume no lo lishma. To which Rabbi Yosef said, why make that assumption? Lo lishma, for sure there's pigul in chatat pnimi. I'm sorry, for sure there's a disqualification in chatat pnimi for lo lishma. But yeah, there's no pigul. Those are two different things. And furthermore, even pigul would disqualify. A machshava chutz lizmano would actually disqualify it, even though it wouldn't make it pigul, which means it wouldn't have curry. Now they just have an additional question. What about a chatat pnimit of chutz l'mkomo? Now, chutz l'mkomo is like pigul, but it's a pigul. It's a machshava of I'm going to do it outside the location that it's supposed to be in, right? Which really means outside the azara. I'm going to eat it or burn it or something, right? Or sprinkle the blood outside the right place, and that is less severe than chutz lizmano because it's only a disqualification, not pigul that you won't get karet for eating the meat. Okay, so now they say eshkan chutz lizmano, chutz l'mkomo monal. And how do we know that there's also chutz l'mkomo in the chatara pnimit? Imi chutz lizmano. Well, if you want to learn from chutz lizmano, you could say no, because chutz lizmano is more stringent. Ma chutz lizmano shekain karet, because it has karet associated with it in general. Imi shelo lishma, which we already proved, it's obvious that it applies to the chatara pnimit. Well, shekain noheg b'bama, but chutz l'mkomo is not relate. It won't work in a bama. Bama was an altar in the time when there was a mishkan. They also had these other altars where people would sacrifice sacrifices, right? And then truth is, once there was a mishkan, you couldn't. Right? Once there's a mikdash, you can't sacrifice on the bama. When there was a mishkan, you were able to. So shelo lishma is a psul in bamot, just like anything really is. But what's not? Chutz l'mkomo, because a bama is just an altar done somewhere. There's no boundaries of the azara, there's no parallel there. There's no chutz l'mkomo in a bama because there is no such thing as an area that's permitted or not permitted. So you could say you can't learn from lo lishma. It has its own chumrah, to which the Gemara says, shelo lishma b'may noheg, b'pesach v'chatat. But wait, the psul of lo lishma is only by pesach and chatat. And lo and behold, pesach v'chatat b'bama lo karvu. You weren't allowed to do a pesach or a sin offering in the bama. So you can't say, oh, there's a chumrah of bama. No, there is no chumrah. That's one answer. So that's how we learn chutz l'mkomo from lo lishma, because this chumrah of bama is actually not applicable to specifically the psul of lo lishma, because all the lo lishma disqualifications can't actually be performed in a bama. Or ibait ema, another option is let's learn it actually from chutz lizmano, which we thought was more chamor, but you could learn it from a hekeshu. Why? Because they're both found in the same pasuk. Where do we learn the laws from? Again, the whole pasuk is really about notar, leaving over the meat of the shlamim. Then it says, if you leave it over by Yom HaShlishi teaches you the idea of chutz lizmano, because also if you have a machshava that you're going to eat it in the wrong time. And pigul, later on the pasuk it says, pigul yiyeh, that must be adding something else. Zeh chutz l'mkomo. That's adding the pasuk of chutz l'mkomo, because they're both in the same pasuk. They're juxtaposed, you could learn one from the other. So either we learn chutz l'mkomo from chutz lizmano, or we learn it from lo lishma. Okay, pigul, now we get to Rav. Rav is going to do 5 intim telomars, which he's going to delve into Rabbi Shimon's opinion and say, if we take Rabbi Shimon seriously, holacha, when it's essential, right, and basically we go with what Rish Lakish said, that when, like for example, the chatara pnimit, where you have to walk the blood in, there's no other way to get the blood there. You can't slaughter it inside the sanctuary. So there is some sort of holacha that alo lishma machshava will ruin it because that holacha is essential. So now he's going to quote different opinions about different things that other people say. And if you hold by those opinions, then here's what Rabbi Shimon will say in this case. Okay? That's how it's going to work. And they're all introduced with imtim salomer. If you want to say Rabbi Shimon holds by so-and-so's position of this, then blah, blah, blah. Okay? So we're going to see. Amar Rav, imtim salomer Rabbi Shimon savar la kibrei. If he holds like his son, who said, Bein ulam lemizbeach tzafon, that the tzafon area where you can sacrifice even extends all the way to the ulam. Now let's talk about the chatah pnimit then. If you could slaughter the chatah pnimit right up to the entrance to the ulam, then when is your machshava going to be problematic? Which holacha is essential? Only from the entrance to the ulam into the sanctuary, right? Because if tzafon ends and you can only do it opposite the altar, then there's more room, right? Then you have to walk from the altar to the ulam, from the ulam into the eichal. Then you have that whole area. But if he holds like his son, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, who holds in this machloket of where can you slaughter the animal, that bein ulam lemizbeach is also considered tzafon, that area extends. You could even slaughter right up to the entrance there. Ein machshava mo'elet. Mo'elet means it's effective, but it means effective to mess up your korban, to disqualify it. If you're talking about the inner chataot, which is what we were talking about, the only time, so let's say I don't slaughter it up against the ulam, okay? I slaughter it earlier on in the room, and then I convey it, and I'm walking it to the heichal. So the first part of my walk up until the ulam, since potentially I didn't need to do holacha there, I could have slaughtered it right there. Then if he holds like his son, then Rabbi Shimon won't say that machshava there disqualifies. It won't disqualify. It will only disqualify if I have that thought when I enter the ulam, right? By the entrance to the ulam, walking into the eichal, that's when it will mess it up. Okay, now the next four are going to be discussing the other direction. What's the other direction? Sometimes you need to carry things outside the heichal to the outer altar. What's the situation? The lechem apanim, the showbread, every week was brought, and every week they would change it on Shabbat. And when they brought the showbread, they put these 2 bowls full of frankincense. And at the end of the week, they would take the bowls of frankincense out from the sanctuary, because the shulchan where the lechem apanim was in the sanctuary. They would carry them out. Again, you're going to have holacha, which is critical. They would carry them out to the outer altar and then offer them up on the altar. And only after that, the kohanim could eat the bread from last week. I know it sounds gross, bread from last week. We're going to learn that there was a miracle and they stayed fresh and they didn't get moldy. That was the whole thing. Now, these had to be carried out. So again, the question is going to be, which part of holacha is essential there? Now, the assumption is within the heichal, even though the shulchan has its particular place, theoretically, the bizichim could have been anywhere in the heichal. So anywhere in the heichal, conveying it would not be an issue. If you had a machshava to burn the stuff tomorrow, let's say, that would disqualify it. Or, so something like that. So now, imtim tzalomer savar like Rabbi Yehuda da'amar, toch azara mekadesh. Now, there's this opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that says that outside, anywhere in the azara, if you put up a fire, now the fires that they would burn things were always done on the altar, but if you decided to put a fire on the floor of the azara, anywhere you wanted, and start burning something on it that's supposed to be burnt on the altar, it sanctifies it and you continue to burn it. We don't say, take it off, you did it in the wrong place. No, because the azara is sanctity, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And anywhere on the floor of the azara, it sanctifies it. So if you hold that way, then even though you're supposed to carry these bizichei levona, these bowls with levona in them, to the altar, if you were to do it right outside the ulam and make a fire right there, you could burn it there, which means that it's not essential to walk from outside the ulam to the altar. And also in the heichal, it's not essential. So where is your machshava going to ruin it? When you're taking them off, right, the shulchan, the entrance to the heichal, because you can't put the shulchan in the entrance to the heichal. From the entrance to the heichal, through the ulam, through the entrance to the ulam, only in those areas. Once you leave the ulam, you could already theoretically burn it right there. The imtim tzalomer savar kedushat heichal ve'ulam chadehu. Now, some people think that the kedusha of the sanctuary went into the ulam as well, which means that theoretically the shulchan could have been in the ulam. In which case, we're going to make that area where you're doing, right, where your machshava can mess you up even narrower, because the only place is just that entrance area. It's a 5-cubit space of the entrance to get into the ulam, because you're not going to put the shulchan there. Well, maybe you can. Intim salomer, the fourth one, the entrance area is just like the inside area. Well, then the only holacha is what? The moving of your, right? There's no walking, because in the opening of the ulam, you could theoretically burn it. The shulchan could be there. And as soon as you walk out of the ulam, you could theoretically burn it. So what's holacha then? The action of you moving your arm outside and extending the frankincense to put it outside. That's the only time where your machshava can mess it up. And we're going to get back to this big machloket later. Imtim salomer sava. If Rabbi Shimon held holacha shelo berega lo shma holacha, that if you do holacha without walking, without moving your feet, which is what you just did now, you just extended it outside right, but you didn't move your feet. If you think that that's not called holacha, then your machshava will never mess it up. Okay? And there's no machshava that can mess up your bizikei levona if you hold by all those things. Okay, so that was an all theoretical discussion. If Rabbi Shimon were to hold by all these things, we'd limit more and more and more and more where your machshava could actually disqualify in this kind of holacha. So again, this is all based on Rish Lakish, who said when the holacha is essential, he actually would agree that your thoughts could mess it up, but only for the essential parts. And then in some cases, we might really narrow that to almost nothing. Okay, we're now going to have the rest of our sugya today is going to be two big questions. So the Amora of Rav Chisda is the guy who used to kind of give the shiur for Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda would say it, and he would be like his microphone. He would say it louder and teach the people. So Abai says to the Amora, Rav Chisda, go ask Rav Chisda for me the following question. Holacha bizar mahu. What if a zar, a non-Kohen, does holacha? Now, we generally talked about, there's 4 avoda, right? Shchita, Kabbalah, holacha, and zrika. We already learned holacha, according to Rabbi Shimon, maybe is not really an avoda. And we've already learned that shchita can be done by a non-Kohen. The others, we always assume, have to be done by a Kohen. But now he suggests maybe holacha doesn't, because we talked about the holacha is not as critical. It's a bit of a different element than all the rest. Maybe it could be done by a non-Kohen. And in fact, Rav Chisda answers very surprisingly. I'm like, Shera, yeah, it is okay. It can be done by a non-Kohen. Umikam sayeni, and I have a pasuk to prove it. It's a pasuk from the Chronicles. Vayishchetu et Pesach, vayizreku kohanim miyadam. It doesn't have the words et adam, even though the Gemara says it. That's not the pasuk. The kohanim, it is the blood, okay, but they sprinkled the blood from their hands. The hands of who? The people who slaughtered the Pesach. Who slaughters the Pesach? Generally, the owners slaughter their own Pesach. Non-kohanim do it. So they took the blood from the hands of the other people. That seems to mean the kohanim obviously accepted the blood. That nobody disagrees about. They must have given it to the non-kohanim. The non-kohanim carried it, and then the kohen took it from there and spilled the blood on the altar. Okay, okay, that's just the continuation of the pasuk. So from there he proves the holacha could be done by a zal. Much of Rav Shesha said, what are you talking about? Turning out to Amabet, zal ve'onein shikoru ba'amum b'kabbalah b'holacha b'zrika pasul v'chein yoshev v'chein small. The main thing for our purposes is a non-Kohen, okay, and a Kohen who's an onen, or a Kohen, by the way, a zar could also be a Kohen who's pasul for whatever reason, right? A shikor, a drunk Kohen, a balmum, someone who's blemished. In Kabbalah, holacha and zrika is going to make it pasul, okay? You can't have holacha by a zar. So Rav Shesha says, very nice, you have a pasuk, but here it says in a braitot, it doesn't work. Also, Yoshev, if the Kohen's sitting, or small, if he's doing it with his left hand, those disqualify all those actions. Tiyuvta. So that's a difficulty to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda krakamar. So what do you do with the pasuk where it said that the Kohen got the blood from the hands of the Yisraelim? Da'avimasa itzdiba. He used them as like a pedestal or a shelf. Okay. What happened? The Kohen got the blood. He gave it to them. Right. Let's say he walked it over, gave it to them to hold because he was busy doing other things, and then took it from them. When it says he took it miyadam, he took it from their hands. And he did it, okay? And that doesn't mean that they walked it. It doesn't say in the pasuk anywhere that they conveyed the blood. Now we're going to see that Rav Yosef, about this whole question of is it pasul bizarre or not, this action of holacha, he says, wait a minute, obvious. Holacha bizar machloket Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan. We could just connect this with the machloket of Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. Rabbi Shimon da'amar avoda she'efshar levatla lav avodahi k'shera b'zal. Rabbi Shimon says it's an avodah that's not essential. You can live without it. And because of that, right, he had his whole opinion, machshava doesn't ruin it. If you have a psul machshava, he would say you could also do it by a non-kohen. And the Rabbanan, the rabbis who say whether it's right, you can manage without it or not, it doesn't matter. It's still a malah, it's an avoda, and machshava could mess you up during holacha. Likewise, a zar can't do it. It has to be done by a kohen. Okay, that's Rabbi and Rav Yosef. Now, comes Abai and he questions this. And he says, wait a minute. You're going to say whatever's an avoda can't be done by a zar, but wait. V'hashchita da'avoda she'efshar levatla. Now, if you're saying an essential avoda, so shchita is an essential avoda. You can't have blood from the sacrifice without slaughtering the animal. So, and that's obviously a critical part. And yet, k'shera b'zal, right? If you're saying anything that's essential that you can't do without is going to mean it has to be done by a kohen. Look at shchita; it's an avoda. Can't be done it can't be done. You can't do without it, and yet a non-kohen can do it. To which Amar Lei, they answer back: shchita lav avoda. Shchita is not an avoda. And this is very tricky. Okay, if you look at your bookmarks, for example, the 4 avodot, right? The 4 rituals are shchita, kabbalah, holacha, and srika. They must be talking about, in the commentaries say, they must be talking about, it's not an avodah. I think it's Rashi who says it. It's not an avodat kehuna. In other words, there's 2 terms of avodah. Okay, there's the 4 rituals. Okay, it's a ritual for the sacrifice or a rite, a sacrificial rite. But it's not an avodah that has to be done by a kohen. Okay, it's just not one of these, right? It's just not. So then they say, wait a minute. Below, you want to say shchita is not an avodah? V'ha amar Rabbi Zera amar Rav shchita para bizar psula. The shchita of a para aduma is only right is an avoda that needs kahuna. If you slaughter the para aduma to prepare the purification waters that you put in, right? You have to slaughter a para aduma for it. That is disqualified to do with non-kohen. So that shows it's an avoda. And I'm a Rav, right? Rav, when he quoted this braitot, he said, Elazar, v'chukak tivba. Okay, Rav said about this, it says Elazar Kohen, and it says chukah. Chukah means it's essential. Okay, just like if something's written twice, it's essential. Also, if the word chukah is mentioned, it's essential. So, there you have it. It sounds like shchita is an avoda, certainly by the paraduma, and therefore we assume by other korbanot. To which they answer a very kind of strange answer, which they're going to reject in a minute, but shane parad, the koche beta kabayiti. Paraduma is a totally different world. Paraduma is koche beta kabayit. It's not an actual sacrifice. Why? Because we don't bring it on the altar. We don't put the blood of the para on the altar. It's all just to create this purification waters. That's in the category of beta kabayit. Okay, there's 2 categories of kedusha. One is kedusha mizbeach. That's the high level sanctity, things that are going to go on the altar. And then there's things that their value is sanctified. That's beta kabayit. That's other things. So because of that, it needs kahuna. So the Gemara says, what? It's the opposite, the logic would say. We're always much more lenient with beta kabayit. The love called the kenu, it's not a kol sheken, like all the more so. Koche beta kabayit havi avoda. If by koche beta kabayit the shchita is avoda and needs a kohen, koche mizbeach lav avodahi, right? But by when it's going on the altar, we're not going to view shchita as you need a kohen. That doesn't make any sense. So, in other words, shchita must not be an avoda. And then, but what about paraduma? We don't really know. So, Amrav Shish Braid Rav Idi. It's just like looking at a nega. When a kohen looks at sarat, a leprous mark, to see is it leprous or not, it has to be done by a kohen. But it's not because it's an avoda, it's not a sacrificial rite or anything. Delav avodahi by a kuna. In other words, there's certain things that the Torah says you need a kohen for. The paraduma, the Torah says you need a kohen. That doesn't teach you anything about things that go on the altar and shechita for the altar. In other words, there's a special pasuk that says the kohen does this. Okay, so the paraduma has to be handled by a kohen, just like the leprous marks have to be handled by a kohen. But you wouldn't learn from there to shechita in the temple on sacrifices. They're 2 totally different tracks. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, now we're back to asking on this principle that Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef said. But first we said, what about shechita, right? Shechita is essential. Your whole theory is essential, needs a kohen. Shechita is essential, doesn't need a kohen. Oh, shechita is not a avoda that needs kahuna. Okay, simple. What about shechita paraduma? We dealt with that. That's just a different thing. Now we say, what about holachad ivarim lakevesh? Bringing the parts. Okay, this is in the korban tamid, for example, or korbanot olah. You have to bring the parts of the body to the ramp. It's avoda she'efshar lebatlahi, because you could theoretically slaughter the animal right next to the ramp, cut up the pieces, and put it right there. So you wouldn't need to walk it to the altar. And yet it's psula bizarre. How do we know? Dichtiv, ikriva kohen et hakol v'yiktira mizbecha. V'amar mar, what does it mean, ikriva kohen et hakol, and then burns it on the altar? What does it mean, he brings everything? Zoho lachat ivarim lakevesh. And it says the kohen has to do it. So here you have a non-essential action. Why is it not essential? Because remember, the korban is atoned for by the blood. Once you're done with the blood, you're done. Now you have to burn the parts, but if you didn't burn them, you still got atonement through the sacrifice. So the Gemara answers, okay, so we have two avodot, the shchita, right? And we have not the shchita right now. We're talking about the holacha, which is not essential, and which we're saying if you hold it's not essential, like Rabbi Shimon, then you'll say it doesn't need a kohen, and the holachad ivarim lakevesh, which also isn't essential, but needs a kohen. So to which they say very simply, hecha de gali gali, hecha de lo gali lo gali. When the pasuk said you need a kohen, then you need a kohen. When the pasuk didn't say, then you don't. As it doesn't. So if it's essential, it needs a kohen. If it's not essential, and again, it'd have to be an essential avoda, which we don't count the avoda of shchita as avoda. It's a bit of a weakness here because we do normally call it avoda, but you have to say that. Then we have the avodot, the rituals, which do generally, so now they generally need kohen, but if they're not essential, then they don't, unless it says so in the pasuk, like this one for the holachad ivarim lakevesh. Filav kol dekenu, but wait a minute, shouldn't it be a kol shekain? Because again, ma holachat ivarim lakevesh to lo ma'akva kapara baya kuhuna holachat dam de ma'akva kapara lo kol shekain. Holachat dam in the end though is something that is part of on the way to getting kapara. It's essential, at least, right? In the case where you didn't slaughter it right near, you have to bring it over. And the burning of bringing the parts to the altar is not. So wouldn't you think all the more so? So we're left with this question. And now we have a psak, it marnami. It was also said, Amar Ula Amar Rabbi Elazar, holacha bizar psula afilu le Rabbi Shimon. Comes Ula in the name of Rabbi Elazar and says, even Rabbi Shimon holds holacha, even though he doesn't view it as an essential act, and there's no issue of lo lishma, for example, achshava shelo lishma doesn't posel, or pigul doesn't, but it has to be done by a kohen, okay? As we thought from the beginning, of course it has to be done by a kohen, but even though we saw some other opinions that not, right, we saw Rav Chisda who said you didn't think so, but he paskins that you do. Okay, Ibayalhu, last question for today. Holacha shelo beregel, shma holacha or lo shma holacha. I said we get back to this. If you convey the blood without moving your legs, okay, you put your arm out, let's say, okay, is that holacha or not? Tashma. So we're going to have 3 attempts to prove it from a source. We're not going to prove it, and then we're going to have a psak of Ula again, this time in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Tashma, v'chein yoshev, v'chein small pasul. What we saw before, if you're sitting, it's disqualified. The kohen sits while he's doing these actions, it's disqualified. Now, what can you infer from that? Or we can try, then we're going to reject the inference. Ha'omed dumia di yoshev kasher. If you're standing like you're sitting, meaning you're standing without moving and you pass it, it sounds like it's kasher, which would be an answer to our question. It works. But they say, no, dilma yoshev de kashayif meshav. Maybe yoshev means you're scooting you're sitting down on the floor and scooting your body. That's pasul. But omei dumia di yoshev denai porte. Maybe what's permitted is an omei where you shuffle your feet. You don't kind of lift them off the ground, but you just shuffle them and move forward without actually moving your feet. But you are moving locations. And maybe that's what's okay. But standing in one place and moving your arm, maybe not. Second attempt. Tashma shachat Yisrael v'kibel kohen. This is in Psachim. They're describing how it would work in the temple. It's describing what went on. So a Yisrael would slaughter it. Kibel kohen, the kohen would collect the blood. Nitano lechavero v'chavero lechavero, and then he would pass it like an assembly line from one to the other. It sounds like nobody's moving, and they would just pass the blood from one kohen to the other. So what do you see here? It sounds like you don't have to move to do holacha. Hatamnami denied a porta. No, each one he would pass it to one, and he would move a little bit, and he would pass it to the next, move a little bit, pass it to the next, move a little bit. Umay kamashlan. Why are they telling us this then? Berov am hadrat melech. They wanted to do the mitzvah with a lot of people, so they would do this assembly line so that a lot of kohanim could be involved in the mitzvah. But everyone had to move a little bit, otherwise it's not holacha. Again, maybe yes, maybe no, but we can't prove it from here. Third and last source, Tashma kibel akasher v'natan lepasul yachzir lekasher. If a kosher kohen accepted the blood and then gave it to someone who was pasul, Yachzir lakasher, he has to give it back to the kosher Kohen, and then that Kohen has to bring it. Okay, so we're learning two things. Number one, it doesn't disqualify it if a pasul touched it. Okay, but it sounds like he has to return it to the beginning so that if he maybe moved it, the Kohen would have to move it himself. And that sounds like you actually have to move. And there wouldn't be holacha. To which the Gemara says, no, Ema, you could just change the wording a little and say, what it really means is Yachzor HaKasher v'Yikabla. If, let's say, Kohen gave it to the Pasul and the Pasul walked it over, and then all that has to happen is not that he returns it to the original Kohen, but Yachzor HaKasher v'Yikabla. They just have to make sure it gets passed off at some point to a kosher Kohen, and he puts it there, which means he could theoretically just move his arm, and that's it. So, and he would take it from the Tsar, and that would be the conveying. And then it doesn't look like you need to move your feet. So we're left with no real answer, but Amar Ulam Rabbi Yochanan, holacha shelo b'regel lo shma holacha. If you move without moving your feet, that's not called holacha. Now, this has two big ramifications. One is, well, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of holacha, which has to be done. Number two, it means that if it's not, so now, if it's not holacha, and let's say while you were moving your arm and put it out, right, and move the blood there, if it's not holacha, and let's say you had a machshava of shelo lishma or pigul, it wouldn't disqualify. So that's another ramification because it's not actually called holacha. Okay, with that we finish our daf. We had a bunch of sections right now. One is lema ketanai. We tried to say tefillat etzba, maybe it's this machloket tanaim, right? And then we said no, maybe it's Rabbi Shimon the Rabbis. We said, oh no, it's not that. And maybe it's chata chitzoni, chata pnimi. Then we had Rabbi Shimon machshir, and then we went to Rish Lakish, who said in the chataot pnimiyot, it's the holacha is actually essential to Rabbi Shimon because you have to get it there. From there, we got to, doesn't he say, there is no pigul? Oh, that's pigul. This is lo lishma. Then we got to all the intim salomas of Rava. If Rabbi Shimon holds this, then he would say there's even less holacha problematic, right? Where you can, your machshava can mess it up, depending on all these halachot about also the chatat pnimi going in and also the bezichei levona coming out. And then we had Abaye. We had two questions. Holacha bizar, is it okay or not? Which in the end we said it's not. And holacha shelo beregel, is it holacha or not holacha? Which in the end we said it's not holacha. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day, Shavua Tov, and Shnishma B'Salot Tovot.